Their whole evolutionary niche is to not be perceived. I can see a huge dairy cow right there. Hi guys, how's it going? My name's Josh. I'm the owner and founder of the Bldg. I have a video today that we have been asked to create for a long time. I know you guys want build videos. Those are coming soon, I promise. But today I want to talk to you guys about some of the most common questions that we are getting about cleanup crews. And this is a video that we've been wanting to do for a while, but we've just been aggregating all these different questions so we can make one quality video and hopefully clear any questions that you guys have. And of course, if there's more that we missed, drop a line in the comments. We'll make sure to answer them for you. But you know what? I think with our two little isopod friends here, I think it's time to get started. The first question that we always get is, when do I add the springtails and isopods when I am putting together my bioactive habitat? Realistically, you should not be putting in your springtails and isopods or any other cleanup crew for that matter until you are completely done building your habitat. After you add your substrate, your biodegradables, your hardscape, and your plants, and all the biodegradables are mixed together, all of your layers are done, that's when you can add in your cleanup crew. And the main reason is because these animals, springtails, isopods, dermestid beetles, whatever you decide to use, they feel stress just like we do. When they're put into a brand new environment, new soil, new plants, you know, they still have it in their head that predation is still a high possibility. But what this is going to do is allow them to get acclimated to their environment. It's going to allow them to find the different thermal gradients, moisture gradients that they're going to need to thrive and to set up shop so they can eventually breed within your habitat. Sometimes when you put them in at the very beginning and mix everything up, sometimes you can run into the problem of failure to thrive, which is when they have issues finding their food, they have issues getting that stress level from here all the way down to here. So treat them as if it's any living animal. You want to set them up for success just as much as you want to set your animal that's going in that habitat up for success. The next question we get a lot is, how do I actually put them in my habitat? I'm always like, well, you just put them in there, but it isn't always that simple because, you know, again, they're live animals. So picking them up and dumping them in and having them splattered onto the ground really isn't. Would you want that to happen to you? No. What we'll typically do is we'll pick a spot that is right by a big piece of wood, or right by a plant with a significant amount of root density, or a large water dish. And then we will just tip the cup. All the spag moss, all the substrate that is in that cup, we just dump directly into the habitat. What we find is they will immediately go for a place of cover. They will find large leaves to be able to go under. They will go under the large rocks, or they will go under the water dish. That almost always seems to be one of the first places they go, is under the water dish, because you and I both know that's where the majority of the humidity is going to be. For the springtails, what we'll do, and there's multiple ways you can get springtails. You can get cellars that have it in charcoal. You can get cultures that are just clay-based, like ours at the Bldg. If you are seeding them from a clay culture, which is what we use here, what I like to do is I will mist that culture with a couple sprays of water, so that way there's a thin layer of water at the very top, causing the specimens to float. It's really easy to then take that water and then dump it into the habitat without completely emptying out the springtail culture. The other option with the clay is you can take the clay culture and you can hold it upside down and then flick it, right like that. What that motion is going to do is cause them to disconnect from the clay and fall into the substrate. And after you use the clay, if you put some food back in there, which I will get into later in this video, that clay culture can last you for an extremely long time to give you multiple seeding opportunities, which sets you up for success long term. We also have a lot of questions of, hey, can I like take a spoon and get this clay out of this cup and put it into the substrate, my answer to that is not recommended. If you are putting in a springtail culture that is primarily composed of charcoal, you can take the entire thing of charcoal and you can dump it into your habitat. Thoroughly mix in the charcoal a little bit without really crushing the critters into your dirt, or just leave the charcoal on the very top. And then after they disperse, cover the charcoal with substrate. But then that completely eliminates the culture. The other option is to fill up the culture with water, so that way the springtails float on the very top. And then dump that water with the floating springtails in your habitat. That is non-invasive for them. It's not as stressful for them. And it works a lot better than having to dump the charcoal out with potential of crushing them or damaging them in any sort of way. The next question is, how can I ascertain how well my microfauna are doing? How can I look at my tank and say, you know what? We have healthy populations in here. I'm looking in here and I don't see anything. We get that often. And let me tell you, these little critters, we know that they are found in almost every habitat in the world. We also know that they have survived multiple extinctions on planet Earth. Their whole evolutionary niche is to not be perceived. How can I search for them properly in my terrarium? The first thing I'm always going to do is I'm going to lift up the water dish. You should almost always see signs of life under the water dish. Almost always. Unless your substrate completely dried out, which then that's a different conversation. Isopods and springtails love plant roots because you get different types of biological processes that occur within those systems, which they eat. What we like to do to actually test our springtail populations, to actually test our isopod populations, is we will take some isopod crunchies, or we will take some Bioactive bug grub and turn it into a little tiny ball about the size of a small marble, right? And what we'll do is we'll lift up the water dish and we will put some isopod crunchies under that water dish, put the water dish back down. I'll come back 4 hours, 10 hours, 24 hours later and just check it and to see, okay, what's coming up to eat this? They love the krill. They love the freeze-dried herring. Put those high protein items under there, and if there are cleanup crew in there, they will be sure to follow. Another really good option is to be able to look at your biodegradables. How quickly are my biodegradables disappearing? How quickly is my snake shed disappearing? How quickly are the urates being left, but the feces disappearing? And what's really nice about the springtails, what's really nice about the isopods is you can culture them yourself. And if you buy a clay culture from us, as long as you mist it once a week and feed it once a week, it will last you almost forever. And you can just keep reseeding and reseeding and reseeding until you get the density that you want. The next question we get is, Biodude, how do I actually culture springtails themselves? So the first thing that you need to look at with your springtails is, do you have a tropical variant or do you have more of a temperate variant? The larger the springtail, the slower they breed. The tinier the springtail, the more prolific they are. Okay, that's the first thing to keep in mind. I'm gonna particularly just talk about clay because clay is what we here at the Biodude have had the most positive success with long-term over charcoal. We typically take a normal container and then we make our own special clay mixture. If you guys are interested in the clay mixture, drop a line in comments, we'll share with you the recipe. It isn't something that I sell, primarily just because of it has a lot of clay in it, which can have silica in it. And if you don't have proper PPE, even when mixing it as a customer, it can be not so great. We'll constitute the clay and then we'll put a good decent amount from one already established clay culture of the particular type that we want to culture into the next one. We open that culture up once a week with a light misting. We give it 2 to 4 sprays depending on the time of year. If it's summertime here in Texas, we only need to do barely 2. But if it's in the middle of wintertime and the humidity is getting between 30 and 40%, that's when we have to up the misting. We have a completely sealed lid with no holes in it because forward flies can get in there and we don't want flyers or gnats or anything getting in that clay. Then we open it up and we feed it once a week with our Biodude Springtail Grub, which you can find on biodude.com. You can also supplement with a higher protein type of food as a treat, such as the Isopod Crunchies Krill. It seems that those larger, more robust springtails seem to enjoy more protein heavier food offerings. And then every single week we'll pop open the culture, mist feed, put the lid back on. And you just have to do that once a week and they will continually produce within that culture. Do not let the clay completely dry out. Do not have puddles of water on the clay, and make sure your clay has elevation differences. We typically use our thumb and put indentations in the clay. What that does is create little water pockets in the U-shapes, right? That's gonna help maintain humidity. It's gonna give different moisture gradients within the clay, and it prevents the clay from drying out. If you live in a really dry area, you can even put a little bit of wet sphagnum moss on top of the clay. That will really help keep that humidity in. You will need to replace that spag moss every single month so it doesn't start growing anaerobic bacteria. When you feed your springtail culture, you will see mold show up on the food item. Mold is okay. Mold is what they eat, as long as it isn't black mold. If you have black mold, you have to completely scrap the culture. Don't save the springtails, don't save anything, because those mold spores will travel from one culture to another. So it's really important that you aren't keeping that food in there for 2 to 3 weeks at a time. You're only giving them enough that they'll eat within 3 to 5 days. So the next question that we get is, how do I know if my springtails and isopods are eating, and what exactly do they eat? So they are considered detritivores in general. How they work within the cycle of Earth is that they help break down organics and turn those organics into nutrients that can be utilized by plants and the substrate alike. There are many different types of isopods, for example, dairy cows that are voracious and need protein because in the wild they will feast on animal carcasses. So one of the things that you need to look at is if you are having a species of isopod that is pretty voracious, we're talking giant canyons, dairy cows, we have to supplement them in the tank with protein items. But when you are just dealing with the run-of-the-mill bioactive habitat, the first step is to always make sure there's enough organics. We're talking hardwoods that they can eat over time, such as your different branches and things, softwoods, cork bark, birch, things like that that they will eat. And of course your leaf litter and some of your spag moss. But if you need to supply them other types of things, you can also supply isopod crunchies or bug grub, and there's other commercial isopod foods out there that are meant to be put into the tank. You just need to make sure that you're paying attention to what you put in there. If it starts growing black mold after 2 days and they didn't eat all of it, you need to pull it, okay? If you are noticing that, you're putting the food in there and they're not eating it, chances are they don't want it, or you don't actually have the population in there that you thought you did. Springtails are going to be typically around your plant roots as well. There are species of isopods that will eat your plant roots, and that is why you need to make sure they stay fed. They typically go to the plant roots when there isn't enough other organics or enough moisture to keep them satiated. The springtails are going to break down your saturated organics, meaning cork bark that has more wet than dry to it. They're going to swarm that wetness because it's soft and easier to break down. They're going to break down the feces of your animal, just like the isopods, but they will not break down the urates. And the urates are the white pellets that's always attached to the feces. That is something that you will always have to pull out of the tank yourself. They will also eat the shed of your animals. In some of our bioactive habitats, we have snake skin, like the corns, for example. When they shed their skin, that skin is gone in a day, maybe less. And the only thing that we'll have left are just little tiny slivers of pieces that are just strewn all across the bioactive substrate on the top. That is an extremely good indicator that you have a very healthy population. The number one indicator that your isopods are not getting enough food is if they start biting your animal. You need to understand the species of isopod you're keeping, so you can facilitate the proper care so they thrive in your bioactive habitat the way you want them to, but also so they don't stress out the inhabitant the tank was built for. If I like to think of treats for isopods, you know, I'll always look at the crunchies for that. But let me tell you guys, they love nut pods. We're talking ram's head nut pods, monkey pods, magnolia pods. They like seed pods that are softer, meaning if I squeeze them, I can crush them up because they're more fibrous. That's another reason why we've had such success with the palm bark, why we have success with the sugarcane bagasse, because it's extremely fibrous and it allows them to eat it easily. The pods that don't do as well are things like Orioco pods, because they are very heavy and very dense and have an extremely tough bark-like outside. So it's harder for those critters to break it down. And the last question that we get is, Josh, how do I know when I need to reseed my habitat? So circle back to all the steps that I mentioned about how can I check my cleanup crew habitat. If you have a large habitat that's bigger than a 40-gallon breeder, I highly, highly, highly recommend that you culture your own isopods. The general rule of thumb is you want those isopods and those springtails to be able to find each other. You want them to be able to spread out, but still have a density enough to create their own little breeding groups within the different sections of the habitat. That is how you get long-term success. So the first thing is making sure you seed enough to start. If you look on my blog, we have a whole guideline on our blog of how to introduce your isopods and what quantity of isopods that you should be introducing given the tank size and the type of environment. At the end of the day, you know, introducing springtails every couple months isn't bad. You can't have too many springtails in my opinion. You could always put some in and pull some out. If you put food in there and you let it sit for 24 hours and you're only seeing 2 to 3 pods in there and they're all babies, okay, that's not a bad sign. That tells you that your adults are producing. But if you are only seeing adults and you're never seeing any babies within that framework of when you're looking at the population of a whole, doing those tips and tricks that we talked about earlier in this video, that's when you should consider potentially adding in more. So that way you can make sure that there's enough male-female ratio for breeding. I see overproduction more with certain species of isopods than not having enough when people seed properly. And again, I'll use dairy cows as an example. They are one of the most prolific isopods that are sold in the hobby. If you ask me, they're more prolific than dwarf whites, even though those are parthenogenic. They just don't stop. And they are voracious, voracious critters. It's just taking those steps. Okay, when I lift up the water dish, am I seeing 20 or am I seeing 200? When I am just looking around the tank, am I seeing any signs of life within the substrate or around the plant roots? You know, but a good indicator is if you have too many, is that if they are starting to bother your animal, because that means there's not enough surface area for those critters to go. On the flip side, if there's not enough in there and you've had your tank set up for 6 months and you're not noticing the benefits you're supposed to be getting at the 6-month mark, we are noticing that shed is not being eaten. We are noticing that feces are not being touched. Those are signs that you do not have enough cleanup crew in your habitat, which then that will ping to you like, hey, I should probably do a top off. But the only way to do that is by taking the steps and fully understanding what isopods you have and how they function as an animal. And then from there, you can make an educated decision on if you need to add more or not. But if you have more than one bioactive habitat, I highly, highly recommend that you have at least one master culture of isopods and at least one master culture of springtails, because you never know when you'll need to reseed. And yeah, it's an investment up front, but that is the standard. What we're promoting is that is the standard. And when you're able to achieve that, you know, that's how you're able to make sure that your animal is being given the best. Another question that we commonly get is, do I actually need springtails and isopods to have success in a bioactive terrarium? It's kind of a mixed bag answer because these microfauna, besides breaking down your organics, reinforcing relationships in your dirt with your plants in your soil, as well as putting macronutrients in your soil, they're also very effective aerators. And what I mean by that is they help create air pockets in the soil, which helps with root development, which plays a huge role with spreading those nutrients in your soil. They help keep the area clean for your animal. So that way there's a less of a buildup of bad bacteria, bad funguses, and things like that that could potentially harm your animal. There are cases though, when you don't want to use isopods because they can harm your animal. So let's talk about tarantulas for a second. We know that, if you would put a top-dwelling isopod, let's say a powder blue, okay, in with a curly hair tarantula, we know that when that tarantula goes through its molt process, that it's going to be constantly interacted with and being stressed out from the isopods, right? So for tarantulas, we don't recommend any isopods. We just recommend a whole hardy group of springtails in there that has a high population density. And that is what we've had a lot of success with, and they still get those desired effects, albeit it may not be as quick. It cycles a lot longer, and your breakdown of organics isn't as efficient, but it still works. Whereas with the isopods in a normal setup, that is what helps expedite that breakdown of organics as well as all the other benefits. So to answer your question, in my opinion, yes, you do need springtails and isopods to effectively reach that consistency. Can it be done with one or the other? Yes, but you as keeper have to keep a much more closer eye on your soil ecology and health for long-term success. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's a little bit different than what we normally do. And like I said, we will get build videos coming this year, I promise. But I really hope this video was helpful to you guys. If there's other questions or any other way that you think we could help you be more successful with understanding the necessity of these creatures, drop a line in the comments, guys. We are here to help you. We are here to have you be successful with your build and give your animals the best life possible, because that's really all we care about. I really appreciate you guys clicking on this video. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. It really means a lot to me. It really helps us grow as a small business. And don't forget to follow us on all of our socials if you're not already. And you can visit my website, thebiodude.com. On my website, under the Fauna tab, you will find beautiful captive bred, not so common animals with a 14-day guarantee. Or visit me and my staff here at my store in Houston, Monday through Saturday. The dude abides.